This is the Bottom Shot Podcast.
Pulvereri is up high. They come out of turn number 4. Stutter between the turns. The fans come to their feet.
It is Ted Christopher still in command. Keith Rocco right there on his back bumper.
Bringing Stafford Motor Speedway's past and present together.
They are side by side running for the finish line. It's a photo finish.
Deep into turn number 3. He goes in deeper than most. Christopher is in trouble. It is Keith Rocco to slingshot to the bottom, and he'll take down the win.
A Stafford Motor Speedway production where we will hear from the personalities from the past and present that found success on the legendary half-mile oval.
The scoreboard shows goose eggs as they wait. It's Pulvereri. He wins it by inches over Richie Evans in the Spring Sizzler.
Unbelievable chain of events.
Now, here are your hosts, Paul Arute and Kyle Rickey.
Welcome to another edition of the Bottom Shot Podcast here from the Stafford Motor Speedway. I'm Kyle Rickey, joined by Paul Arute once again. And Paul, 2020, wow, what a year it's been. Since we were last in this room, I feel like the world has changed and your world has gone topsy-turvy a couple of times. But somehow, you guys got almost an entire season in despite everything that's gone on.
Right, I think the last time we did a podcast in here was, who was it? It was probably, was it Bo Gunning?
I think it might have been Bo.
I think this is before the coronavirus even existed. So we were talking about the Sizzler. We had a Sizzler countdown going. But, we somehow, some way pulled the rabbit out of the hat. Got it in. We got in 18 events. I think we had some great competition, great car counts, great entertainment throughout the whole season. Some surprises, some not surprises, along with Keith absolutely dominating the season. You were at a ton of events this summer, so kind of talk us through what your take on the season was as an announcer, as a pit reporter, as a PR guy.
It was a great 2020 season. I think you touched on it. The competition here at Stafford, second to none. We say that year in and year out. Another great year. We saw Keith Rocco dominate the SK Modifieds, but we had full fields and consies in the modifieds almost every single week. I mean, great competition. The SK Lights this year, we saw a bit of a changing of the guard with some of last year's big names like Teddy Hodgson moving up into the SK Modifieds. And this kid, Derek Debus, kind of comes out of nowhere and stole the show more times than not this season.
Crazy part about that is he didn't even qualify at the opener.
Yeah, for the first race.
And I think he ended up with 6 or 5 victories this year, so very impressive. And then you see Brian Sullivan, who skips 2 events, and somehow is able just to be the consistent driver and come out with the title. At one point, Alex Pearl was up 75 points on a second, but I don't know what the Pearls did, but they had an unlucky 4. It was almost a month where they just couldn't get a finish.
I did the math. 3 weeks in a row, Alex finished 18th or worse. And in those 3 weeks, Brian was Mr. Consistency. I think every race he started this year, he finished in the top 6 or 7. And it was like a 121-point swing from where Alex was at the start of that 3-week period to where he was in points 3 weeks later. And he was second at that point, some 50 out.
I feel so bad for them. But Alex is also just I think he ended up with 4 victories, so it's not a bad season, but 70 points ahead to being in second in a matter of a couple of weeks, craziness. But it was a good season. Looking forward to taking a break from 2020 and just thinking ahead at the next Sizzler. We haven't had a Sizzler now in 2 years almost, so it's going to be a 2-year break from the greatest race in the history of spring.
And that's another thing that 2020 has brought on. A lot of those annuals are going to go away. All the local fairs, the 131st annual, the annual part goes away, and the same thing with a lot of events here. But that's all right, as long as we get on track. It's
still going to be the annual. It's going to be the 49th. Yeah. It's just like at the Indy 500, they took a break.
They did.
They took a break for the war. I mean, that's so it pushes out the exciting 50th out a year, but it's going to be a big one. But just strange to not have a Sizzler. We didn't even get open until almost July, which is just bizarre. But the weather cooperated and had a good summer. Can't complain.
was going to say, it was nonstop from, I think, one rain out after you guys got open and then went right through into October for, I think, the first time as far as Friday night competition. A great year. Late models were good. One of the most competitive years we've seen in your division as well.
Yeah, that was, that has really turned into a really challenging, tough class pretty much. Any driver in the field can get a win. The races are quick. They're short. 20 cars a week. It means you got to be on the wheel at the start. The top guys in the division, which is half the field, are starting 10th or back. Adam Gray ended up, being very strong, but it really shows how they have a really good knowledge of their car, the track. They have a lot of experience. But then you look at the 12 car, Ryan Fern, very talented. He has his ups and downs in the field, gets a little aggressive, but man, he drove the wheels off that car on the final Friday.
Passed more cars than I think anybody over the last month of the season, but unfortunately something would happen.
I would say the story of the year in that division has got to be Tom Fern.
Winless.
It shows how tough those cars are. You can be the best guy out there and pretty quickly, get out of the game in a matter of a week. And it's not a knock on the Ferns because they obviously they know how to set the car up. They know how to drive. It's just you got to be perfect in that division. You got to have your whole program has to be perfect. And it's put on it's been some great action.
Great photo finishes, a lot of different winners, including yourself and Daryl Keene and Tyler
Lightning
Leary.
does strike every now and then at Stafford Speedway.
Limited late models again. It was kind of the Andrew Duran and Alexandra Fern show most of the year. Jeremy Lavoie was a close third. And the street stocks. Wow. What a final night for the street stocks with Zach Robinson picking up his second consecutive championship as Megan Fuller had the title going into turn 4 in the final lap, but unfortunately there was contact.
Yeah, I don't even know what to say about that.
Not many people do.
Loss of words, but I think Meg's got to be pretty excited about what kind of came out of it.
Yep.
She's going to be in an SK a light car in the spring. Actually, she made her debut at the final event of 2020. Did a great job, and there's another generation of bowlers in the modifieds, which is great to see. I know a lot of the fans are excited. Meg has a lot of expectations, but I know Rick, a past guest of the show, will pass along all his knowledge and his expertise on the car, and it's going to be interesting to watch Meg develop.
It'll be fun to watch Megan in the modifieds in the SK Lights next year. Zach also announced he's moving up to the late models next season.
Did not know that.
So,
is that official?
It was said in Victory Lane, so it better be official.
That's excellent. Wow.
So a lot of movement here in the offseason as teams are already looking ahead to 2021. We look ahead to our next guest here coming up on the Bottom Shot Podcast. Well, this is going to be a treat for us. Obviously, the Arute family, long known here at the Stafford Motor Speedway, and we are here with, Jack Arute Jr., who has held every position here at the Stafford Motor Speedway, including my mentor 25 years ago.
And I am so sorry.
Sorry to every listener on MRN or what he's done to poor Kyle Rickey.
Welcome to our digs.
That's a lot of fun. I'm really, really pleased to be here. Quick story, Paul called me just before COVID-19. I was scheduled, and then the CDC slapped me in the face, and they shut everything down.
We're glad you're here now, though.
Well, and I'm happy to be here, too.
Yeah, so it's my uncle Jackie on the podcast, which is great, I'm excited to kind of get into some of the early days of the Arute, taking over the Speedway. So kind of just to kick it off, what was your first time seeing a race car? Can you bring us back to the early days as a kid?
My dad was involved with the Arute brothers, and they lived just over the bridge from where we were living on South Main Street. So my fun and games was as 9 years old, ride my bicycle over the bridge, and I'd go hang out and be able to polish the car and sweep the floors. And our big treat, because your grandfather In one respect, that time, he worked away in New York or wherever the construction company was, and he would fly in on Friday night. Friday night was devoted to meeting out discipline from the report from my mother, your grandmother.
Plenty to discipline you for, huh?
And Saturday, he'd be off with the Garutis to Riverside Park. And they competed there, and once a year we were allowed to go for the Riverside 500. Wow. And probably the most lasting memory for me was at a 500, Giacomo Magiacomo, and I cannot recall who he was teamed up with, but it was a team race. So, usually you would try to split it or something like that. Whoever he was teamed with, I believe, crashed on the 10th lap. And Jocko went out and raced the entire remaining 490 laps and won. Now, that in and of itself, was a great accomplishment.
At Riverside, too.
But the deal was, when the car won a 500, we hung around because they paid the cash off at the beer garden. Usually it took an hour, hour and a half. Well, the Garutis and my dad, and I was with Ronnie and Raymond. They were, race kids. They would hand us like $10 bills to go ride the rides.
Oh, nice.
So every 500 we cheered probably more than anybody else in the stands because of the payoff for us.
Yeah, it's like, so it's the payout is whatever the kids are going to get.
Exactly.
So is there in that time, is there ever a time where that car ends up at Stafford and you kind of come here, or is it later on?
Well, actually, they raced at Riverside for a number of years, and when Stafford converted from dirt in the 60s to asphalt, took a couple of years, but they decided, and see, they were running the United Racing Club. They were non-NASCAR. And they made the jump. And that was the 14. Mm-hmm. And at that time, they had a pretty steep learning curve, because we're talking about some of the very best that competed here. And the one part I remember is we ran at Thompson as well, and there was a construction worker that was with the operators union, Ted Stack, and they decided to, kind of please everybody and the operating engineers to field a second car for Ted Stack, and it was a Chevy 2. And I'll never forget the thrill. We didn't have big trailers, enclosed trailers. They had a ramp truck where they would put the 14 or the 28 on and tow Ted Stack's Chevy 2 behind on an open trailer. And that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. And so explain to some of our listeners. So the Arutes owned a car with the Garutis, and kind of, just explain just the basics on who were the drivers and kind of in that day. You know
what? We were very fortunate. The Garutis that are now in the Hall of Fame, along with my dad, your grandfather, they were really well ahead of their time. I would say that they were probably the first that utilized tire stagger. They were the first to try, because they didn't like being beat. So in the early going, it was an assortment of drivers from Billy Greco to Eddie Flemke, and then we kind of settled on this guy from Pelham, New Hampshire, Nathan Smokey Boutwell. And when Ray and Rich presented it to your grandfather, he didn't know anything about him. And Ray had said, "Look, I went up to Norwood Arena, and he's burning the place down." The most quiet driver I've ever met in my life. Big, lumberjack type of guy.
Sounds like a big guy.
And they won a lot of races here at Stafford. Now, this is all before Stafford was acquired by your grandfather. And I was the flagman.
So this is before the purchase, though?
Yes. I was the flagman. And I was taking down $75 a week cash.
Wow.
And back in the 60s, that was
good.
Big money, okay? And then...
How'd you... So let's go on that. How did you become the flagman at Stafford if you're going to Riverside and you're not even coming here yet?
Well, no, we went
okay,
to
the cars are coming
we
back
went
here.
here while they were competing and winning features before Dad bought the racetrack. And when Dad purchased it, Eddie Flemke was driving the 14. Okay. But I made the mistake after they had just closed on the purchase. I think it was week 2. We were sitting at the breakfast table, which was really unusual because usually it was dine and dash for 6 kids. And I said, you know, Dad, your announcer sucks. That's an exact quote. And because it's a podcast, I can get away with this, or you can beep it out. Want. And I feel comfortable because I saw the Mike Christopher podcast.
You're good.
Yeah, you cannot be beat.
He says to me, well, if you think you can do any better, get your fat ass up there this weekend. All right. I got a cut and pay. When I went to get paid, $30. Okay.
The flagman's important, man.
Well, yeah.
Who was the announcer? Whatever.
Yeah,
Joe Schmo, he obviously sucked anyways, right?
But that was the beginning of, God, so many years here.
Yeah.
Until I left to, take the challenge of creating MRN.
So before we jump ahead here, I have this great picture of a young Jack Arute selling ice cream at Plainville. Kind of talk me through that. That's amazing.
As I said,
you look just like me, eh? And my dad says you ate a couple more ice creams than you sold back then.
Well, I'll get to that. The deal with your grandfather was, look, because I wanted to go to the races, because early on, I figured out that the way that I could, kind of get a relationship with your grandfather is like the things he liked, all right? And he and the Garutis would go every year since the early 50s, ride the train to the Indianapolis 500. And he would send back all the newspapers for the entire month of May. Mm. And he'd bring back these Floyd Clymer record books. And the rest of the year, he'd, pepper me with, all right, who drove the John Zink special? Cool. And I got pretty adept at it. But he also maintained that this is his, and if you want to go to the races, you got to figure out a way to do it. Mm. Now, your grandmother at the time, she's trying to handle all these kids, and
just
I'm the worst.
Them, huh?
Yeah, and I'm the worst. I convinced your grandmother I can go to Plainville Stadium because I can ride the bus. And don't worry, Mom, there's a bus that can take me home after the races. Well, okay. So I go to Joe Tinty, and he knew our family, and he hires me to sell ice cream. Well, I sold the crap out of that ice cream all during warm-ups. The minute the first heat took the green flag, I'm at the top of the stands with an empty ice cream box. But I was smart enough that, okay, I was ahead of the game because a lot of them would show up a little bit later. Just before intermission, I'd come down out of the grandstands, and just before, when the grandstands funneled out, and before they got to where the ice cream stand itself was, I'd sell more ice cream. Well, that worked great. Yeah. Making a little pocket change, getting to see the races. And then about halfway through the season, Joe was kind of strutting around, and he looks up, and he sees me in the grandstands and fired me on the spot.
Oh, no.
But in the meantime, there was no bus line taking anybody back. And Mo Guernsey was the race director, and he had driven for the Garutis at Waterford Speed Bowl, where, by the way, they won every race that they finished.
Wow.
It was something like 17 or 18 events. Well, Mo felt sorry for me, so he would drop me off at home.
There was no bus.
There's no bus. Come on.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. That's awesome.
Before we get further into the acquisition of this racetrack, do you remember night one here?
Oh, yeah.
You walked into Stafford Speedway for the first time.
Not as an owner, but I remember night
first
one.
Time you've ever
absolutely.
Seen the place.
We pitted on the backstretch, and there was a little tin shack that remains
Still
to
there,
this day. That was the sign-in booth. And you got to understand that I hadn't attained the age of 16 yet at that time. And we used to, all the kids, we would hide in the trunk, anywhere to get out. And the funny part was Fran Grote Sr. was the chief steward. And he knew. But he also knew that that kind of went with the territory.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing I do remember a little bit further down the road is when the brash young man by the name of Jeff Bodine showed up here for the first time. And he didn't make any friends, and he didn't take any prisoners. Well, there was a guy that was a former semi-pro boxer by the name of Don Flynn. And every car that he ever raced in was impeccably prepared. Beautiful pieces. Well, more often than not, didn't go back to Windsor Locks in that condition. And probably the majority of times it was because he had a fandango with Bodine. So we had moved the pits over here, and you'd have your driver's meeting, and much the way Tommy Fox does at the end now, he goes, all right, guys, any questions? And Flynn's in the back, and he goes, yeah, I want to know what the fine is for fighting. He goes, what do you mean? He said, I want to know what the NASCAR fine is for fighting. Quick, looks it up. Section 17-3-4, anybody in the pits fighting shall be fined $100. Flynn walks up through the crowd of drivers, hands Franny Grote a crisp $100 bill, and turns around and cold cocks Jeff Bodine.
No way. Come on.
Then
In the driver's meeting.
Then peels off another $100 and says, just if I want to do it later.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tom Fox wouldn't approve of that one. Wow. So this is in then the late 60s we're talking here? Early 70s?
Yeah, early 70s.
So what's the kind of, again, we're going to get into the acquisition, but I want to hear what's the vibe kind of the, of the drivers and the track then? I can't even really imagine the late 60s in racing.
Well, you have to remember the current state of Cup racing. There were no truck series. There was no truck series. The Xfinity series were late model sportsman cars, and basically it was a limited schedule that was culminated with the Permatex 300 at Daytona, and all of the drivers from around the country, they would cobble together some sponsorship, and then they would go down there and race in a late model sportsman car. So the drivers that were coming to here and going to Thompson and to Norwood and to Albany, Saratoga, and you literally, with the introduction of the All-Star League, you could race 6-7 days a week because Catamount Stadium was operating. They were the best of the very best. Richie Evans, Bugsy Stevens, Freddie DeCero, Bobby Santos. The list is endless. And they made a lot of money. In real-world terms, Richie Evans probably put away more than $100,000 a year.
Wow.
Well, in that era, that's big money. Now, what did it cost to build those cars?
Yeah.
Well, far more, far less than today, because they used Scout chassis and they, the pre-war bodies. But it was some of the best racing that you would ever see. And then one of the biggest shows, the Dogwood 500 and the Cardinal 500.
Cardinal, that's what we were talking about earlier. Yeah.
At Martinsville, but Trenton Speedway. It's 1.5 miles with a right-hand dogleg. Well, it was one thing to watch Indy cars there. It was another thing to watch the NASCAR Grand National cars. But when they would assemble over 150 cars to attempt to qualify for the 30 spots, and you would see these big open-wheel, fire-breathing modifieds with fuel injection that had a lot of speed, but they weren't aerodynamic. And I'll never forget, and you asked Bugsy Stevens, who's going to be on this podcast, about this. I asked Bugsy, when do you know to turn right? And he says, it's real easy, when the right front lifts up off the ground. Okay?
Wow.
Modified.
Yeah, are you tongue-tied? I want to know. Do I intimidate you to this day?
I mean, I
Since
think he's terrified of you.
Yeah.
I don't think he's the only one either.
So modifieds, and I get this question all the time, why are they king only in New England? They've always been king up here. Why?
Well, a little education. When NASCAR was first founded, it was the very first division that they sanctioned. And to answer your question why, their precursor was midgets during the war and at the end of the war. And the midget series in the Northeast would run as far south as New Jersey, and they had really from Lonsdale, New Hampshire, over to Cherry Park, and you could run 8 times a week. Well, these short tracks around here, they could only hold the midgets once in a while, and at the end of the war, there were a lot of mechanic types that were back from the war, and they tinkered, and that gave birth to the modifieds up here. You got to understand that when the first modifieds that raced at Riverside Park utilized Ford flathead engines. But it became a crucible for creativity. Everybody thought they could build a better mousetrap, and it was rewarding. And the crowds, in the 50s and the early 60s, we didn't have cable TV. We didn't have
There's really nothing.
All this stuff.
Yeah.
You had racing. And you got a taste of it with the coverage of the Indianapolis 500, or everybody tuned into Wide World of Sports to hear Jim McKay say, we'll be back to the cliff diving in Acapulco, but now let's go to Chris Economaki in Darlington. All right, but it were the short tracks because you could go there. It was inexpensive. It was less than going to the movies. And it was pretty damn exciting.
Yeah. And I think to kind of tie that back in, I think that's kind of the direction the sport is going now. I think the short tracks are really becoming the cornerstone of, ovals in America. While the Cup Series, the racing isn't as exciting as it in the past, but look at Stafford on a Saturday afternoon, and there's 50 cars going for 30 spots, right?
It was absolutely amazing.
That's something I never thought I'd see again.
Reminded me of the early days of the Spring Sizzler. And the electricity and the excitement and that sense of urgency in the qualifying heats, and then the Consi and then the B main. It was incredible.
It was a buzz.
The Parts Peddlers 50 or whatever it was years ago, the last chance race.
Well, in fact, I'm going to challenge you. The pole position for the Spring Sizzler, you know what they used to win?
They used to give him a telephone pole.
Yeah. Now, come on, you're a pretty creative
guy. You used to roll out.
That's
you used
right.
to get a telephone pole. I think it was only for the
first
one.
First two. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll have to ask Lou Boyd about that one. He'll be able to tell that story. But
to go back to what you're saying is, and I do think that in order, Dad, my grandfather, your grandfather, I get confused, and my dad.
They're all Jack.
Yeah. I'm the third, by the way, not Junior.
Yeah.
He used to always say, if you don't study history, you're doomed to make the same mistakes.
I mean, it's so true, and especially in this sport. It really is.
And here's what happened. All of a sudden, NASCAR got on this tear that they were going to establish these 3 premier divisions. And they turned their back on the foundation of NASCAR, and that was America's short tracks. They thought that we would be satisfied with writing several $1,000s a week to them to purchase their sanction. It was during the time of Dennis Huth, the time of Brian France, the time where all of a sudden, my God, we've got offices in New York City, we've got NASCAR offices in California, and it was top-heavy. And you would call to Daytona Beach, and you couldn't even get anybody to give you anything but lip service. So that disassociation from NASCAR really created a lot of problems. But here's what happened. You could only go to a few cup races or truck races a year. So where were you going to feed yourself?
Yeah.
And so that burned bright. And then all of a sudden the racing is so much better.
It's unbelievable here.
And the ladder system is working.
You've seen a lot of laps at a lot of tracks all over the world. SK is on a Friday night here. Does it get much better?
No.
It really
No.
does. And I say that, and people, you're there.
Hey, look.
I don't think
all right.
it's incredible.
I'm going to dismiss it from you. Burt Myers texted me and said, "Hey, I'm coming up north. I want to drive an SK. I've never driven an SK in my life." And we worked hard. You worked hard. I worked hard. And we got him married up with Kid Rock. And he went out there. And afterwards, I texted him. I said, "Well, what do you think?" He says, it's the most challenging and hardest car that I have ever driven. And the late Ted Christopher used to say, the development of the SK Modifieds, and it's very similar to be it Indy car or any car, so-called spec racing series, the margin between the fast cars and the slow cars is minuscule. If you miss a quarter of a pound on stagger, you're OTL.
Yeah.
So, and that week in and week out. That's why I think when somebody here can win a number of races back to back, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Now,
They found something.
let me give you Wally Dallenbach was the chief steward and was a great IndyCar driver. And Wally Dallenbach Jr. went to his dad and said, "Hey, I think I want to be a race car driver." And Wally Sr. said, "If you want to be a race car driver," and the SKs were in existence, he said, now they lived in New Jersey. He said, "You go run Friday nights at Stafford Speedway. If at the end of the season you still want to be a race car driver," so that I think nationwide, no matter where I've gone, there's a tremendous amount of respect for the SK series. And let's face it, it saved modified racing.
Yeah, I believe that.
Yeah.
There's plenty of there's plenty of the haters that'll still complain that.
And how old are they?
I mean
that's
they're a dime a dozen still.
The haters are aging out.
Yeah, fair.
And old people. Sorry, I'm one of them. But old people are resistant to change.
Yeah, for sure. I think everyone is. It's partially.
No.
But I agree. The SKs are in my mind unbelievable every week. In like this season, we didn't have every single Friday as an oh my god, I can't believe I just saw that. But they were still amazing, and we were at the end of the night like, oh man, the race wasn't that good, and you're like, wait a second, let's put it into perspective here, right? There was 15 lead changes in 40 laps. It was a bad race.
Well, by the way, uniquely New England, to your point earlier, I've traveled all over the country. And most short tracks, they time trial and start fast car on the pole or do an invert. Unique to New England. And I don't know the history of who came up with it. But the handicap system.
It's hard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you add, which is, I think, and again, I got to credit your father. His father planted the seed, but the tire inventory that saved modified
and
racing
the lights
as well.
The SK lights.
But that was me.
The lights?
That was me.
All right.
Okay, and you got to understand, and you know this. The dynamic between your dad and I.
Arutes are one and they're all nuts.
Yeah.
Not a single.
Right.
Count me in there too, but they're all the same.
So, I always was thinking big and grandiose. And then I'd walk away, and your dad and your mom have to pay the bills. Okay? But it was a yin and a yang.
Yeah.
So that's where that was born. And by the way, the two-seater started life as an SK Light owned by me.
Yep, that was the 14.
I still have the plaque. I think we finished third
Richie Pillai
with
drove
Richie
it.
Pillai, yeah.
So now let's jump into the acquisition of the track. So purchased in 70.
Mm-hmm.
How did that kind of come about? Why, your father, my grandfather.
We'll get confused. We'll get it figured out soon.
Are in the construction.
Why don't we just say
business.
Jack Sr.?
Jack Sr. is in the construction business
with his brother Chuck.
Successful. It's doing well. It's all over the
Northeast.
The Northeast.
Yep.
And why a Speedway? I know he owns a car, and it sounds like at the times the business was okay, but still the owner of the Speedway was about to go out of business. So,
but we didn't know that at the time. All right?
So, kind of talk me through how it even came about.
Well, look, your grandfather, he had an abiding love for the modifieds, and as I said, for Indy cars. But a little known fact is he was always at odds, and it started at Riverside Park. He didn't feel as if the owners were recognized and supported at the level that they needed to be. The car owners. He always used to say, what has a driver got invested in his career? A helmet and a fire suit. And he gets the fire suit from Firestone for free. Mm-hmm. He says, it's the owners that we need to look at. Well, you weren't going to convince Harvey Tattersall of that. You weren't going to convince Carl Merrill, who was the regional chief steward at the time. And your grandfather there was a small piece of property off of the Berlin Turnpike. It was called the Fox Farm. Mm-hmm. And they had detailed blueprints to build a racetrack.
I've heard this before. Wow.
Okay. And that fell through. So then let's fast forward to 1970. We're up here with the 14, and we're winning races, and everything seems to be going well. And Bill Slater was the race director that was hired by Mel Barlow, because Mel Barlow owned a used car lot in Rockville, and he was like Joe Tinty. He just wanted to be around the people and say, "Hey, thanks, Mel." Well, they pissed away so much money. Mm-hmm. It was around the 4th of July holiday. Bill Sr. goes down to Arute Brothers and walks in and announces, "Jack, I got to talk to you." And Bill, he talked very fast. He goes, "We're going out of business. We're going out of business. I don't know what to do." "Relax, Slater. Tell us what's going on." Bill related, and that rekindled the dream with your granddad. And it was a little bit of a tough sell with his brother Chuck, but they decided, okay, let's go up and see if we can negotiate a purchase. In the span of 24 hours, they did. But herein lied the rub. They couldn't determine what they were going to do with the final race of Barlow, and that was going to be the 4th of July race. And look, it was pretty simple. He needed to pay the bills and
to get out.
And believe me, we were such neophytes.
You had no idea what you were doing. I mean,
Look,
this business is
the
not
monkey
easy.
on top of the rocket ship the first time knew more than we did.
Sure.
Okay? So they negotiate, and they go, "Well, what are we going to do? We'll let you keep it, but here's the agreement. If the race gets rained out, we take ownership." Oh, shake hands, everything's great. It rains. They call the race. Barlow's lived up to his agreement. And Dominic Serra was the office manager, and he would come up here, and he does like what your mom does now, counting out all the money. So your grandfather says, "Look, just honor all the rain checks." Because everybody was saying, "Wait a minute, this is the last one. What are you going to do?" "Just honor the rain checks." Dominic comes in about 10 minutes later, says, "We got a problem." My dad says, "What?" He says, "It seems that Barlow issued tickets in every color of the rainbow to get rid of the stock of tickets. For the rest of the year,
they're coming in.
I swear to God, people went into their pockets. They went into their desks. They retrieved every color ticket possible. Let's just say the attendance wasn't real high during the first year of ownership."
So in that time, though, were you involved, in the first event? Were you at the track? I mean, I can't picture just walking into Stafford Speedway. Hey, it's our place. Let's figure out how to do this, and you've never done it before.
And that's exactly
it's hard.
That's exactly what happened. But we were fortunate. We had Bill Slater, and
he'd been here.
Yeah, and we were even more fortunate. The drivers and the owners. Your grandfather had an incredible, impeccable reputation with him. They may not agree with him all the time, but he was easy to talk to. He was he had a lot of qualities like yours. Okay, had a lot of qualities like me.
Yeah,
we got him, and so he was personable. So they were just happy that they had a place to race.
Yeah,
but then what they realized is, wait a minute. This guy's going to transform this place. Now, we had to finish out the season, but as soon as the checker flag fell, they're tearing down grandstands, they're building new concession stands, they're moving the pits to behind the grandstands, and this doesn't go unnoticed or unappreciated by those drivers.
And 1971 rolls around, and I feel like it didn't take you guys very long to figure it out, because suddenly we have the Spring Sizzler.
Well,
I mean,
let's go back to that for a second, because we proudly love to take ownership of it.
Yeah.
But it wasn't ours.
Yeah, right.
Lou Boyd and Dick Bergeron and the Rag King, Bruce Cohen. Yep. See, they used to run at Lakeville Speedway on the dirt. Well,
where was that? That was in Connecticut,
Lakeville,
right?
Massachusetts.
Okay.
Well, they figured out, hey, we got to come up with a way to pay for our racing. Okay, because Lou was racing the 181 and Bergie was racing, and Cohen was in the pits just bitching and moaning all the time, okay? So they came to your grandfather with this concept. Now, remember, big races, you waited for a holiday, you got some races under your belt, and Labor Day was, 4th of July, but Labor Day was the end of the season. That's when you put your big money up.
Yep.
And there was skepticism on your grandfather's part. But the enthusiasm and the intensity that those three had, he had an affinity for it because it was very similar to him. So, all right, rent the racetrack. Well, we rented the racetrack out to him. And Bruce Cohen loves to tell this story because at that time I was promoting. I was the guy here on the ground, okay? Thank God, because I was tired of shoveling blacktop, right?
He wasn't a good construction worker.
No, I wasn't. And so I spent the night because there was there had to be, I think it was about $50,000 here on site in a small safe. Okay.
And you're like, I'm not leaving this. I'm not leaving my site.
So I slept in, and Bruce Cohen comes in and thinks I'm a burglar.
Oh, no.
It almost shoots me at 5 o'clock in the morning. Okay.
The story ends pretty quick. That's the case.
But it was spectacular. It was phenomenal. Every kind of car you could think of. And that was before dirt cars went in a different design direction, too.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody over the weekend about that and how, we kind of always said that the Saturday's event felt, the tri-track event felt like a Sizzler, but, you're really never going to get back to that. There's 120 cars in the pits because back then, literally every car from dirt to asphalt showed up that day. Now you can't really do that now, right? It's totally different.
Hey, well, I beg to differ with you.
You think so?
Okay. If you manipulate the rules, you could do something similar to that. But
would it be a good
show?
Or,
again, your father looks at me like I've been smoking crack. Why not do like Bristol? I love the dirt.
I mean, I did propose that.
See,
once.
That's the problem.
And
I got to tell you.
You know what he says? Do the math on how many truckloads.
Right.
So I started doing it a little bit. I called the guy who put dirt on a Mansfield.
Yeah.
He gave me a number, so I did some math, and I go, yeah, he's right. We can't put dirt on Stafford Speedway.
But see, you have to understand, there was a night, I can't remember when, and your pop is always pacing in the infield.
Yeah.
Okay, back and forth. And, now he's been relegated because you and David do such a great job just using part of the track crew and just, using a broom. Well, I always sit over in turn 3 on that old TV tower. Now, part of that is just to please your dad because he wants me as far away as possible. But he comes over like a scene out of The Wizard of Oz. Coming right for the stand. He climbs up on the stand and he says, if I didn't know better, I'd swear to God that frickin' Paul is your kid. Right? I took it as a big compliment.
Jeez.
All right.
Yeah. I mean, I think no, there's a lot. I think there were a lot of challenges in the last 10 to 15
Absolutely.
years between the economy and other factors at the business that we're almost really past it now, which is amazing. And I will say his conservative approach really is the reason why this place
still exists.
It exists. People have no idea of some of the background and noise that did occur. Early 2000s. This place was on
Paul,
edge.
I can take you back even further.
Yeah, I know. It's
okay.
History
When
does
you
repeat,
and
right?
your brother on a Saturday morning would be under the grandstands at 5 and 6 years old, raking up the trash.
Yeah.
And you would go, Dad, keep raking, Paul. This place was on the ropes.
Yeah.
Until your dad and your mom came in here, and there were really, really tough times. And you have to understand, just like your grandpa, what did Mark know about promoting a racetrack?
He was shoveling blacktop.
He was a superintendent at Arute Brothers. So he came in here and had to learn it on the ropes. But you hit the nail on the head. That conservative approach is what saved this place.
And what's exciting, I think, about it now is that we've added some of these cool events like the SK 5K with a great partner in Napa. This event on Saturday that we just had with the
CYBD
Call Before You Dig,
81,
another great partner of the track. And now I think we have a strong enough base of a weekly program that we can add, a couple great big events where, it's you circle it on the calendar, but hey, you have to be a weekly competitor at Stafford if you want to even have a shot at the win.
Well,
because
prove that. Yeah.
I mean, look at Dowling, right?
Yeah.
The reason why he's picking the outside against one of the best drivers in New England with 10 to go is because he knows that.
He has the track knowledge
and
that the outside has come in after all of these years, and it is the preferred spot.
And the best part about, I know this is totally a tangent, the coolest part about that pairing, it's Chase Dowling's the driver, Stephen Kopsix, the crew chief, SK Light graduates.
Yeah,
they
absolutely.
The ladder is in full effect here at
Chase,
Stafford.
Chase getting acquired by Dan Avery in that group. I mean, look, Stafford isn't just alive and well. All right. Now I'll throw something on the table, and I can say it because I've got.
I love when he throws the disclaimer out. I got to prepare my brain.
I've been crosswise many times, as you can attest to, with NASCAR. All right. I really question with what the Tri-Track Series did, and keep in mind when they first formed it, they were concerned about, stay on short tracks because it's more cost effective, etc. I really don't see a need to pay the NASCAR mandated exorbitant purse money for the most part, a lackluster wheel-in modified tour event.
Man, you're gonna have Twitter going insane after that comment.
Well, but why? I saw on Saturday. And Ben Dodge is the first one that ever coined this phrase, tour-type modifieds. Mm-hmm. All right? I saw the stars of the modified tour. I saw a very efficiently run program, unlike some of these that we see.
A program that included heat races, consolation events of the B main, and then your feature.
It felt like 1970. That's how I picture the 1970s.
For those of you out there that, you can say, hey, the modifieds, the Wheel of Modified Tour. The Wheel of Modified Tour is not the be-all, end-all, folks. Okay? It's going the same route as the Truck Series, same route as Xfinity, and the same route as the Cup Series. Why? Because it's micromanaged by NASCAR. And what we've lost is the creativity.
Yeah.
I remember when they all had to go to the full windshield on the driver's side. I think it's a great safety issue. But introducing it at mid-season, come on. As Joe Biden says, come on, man.
The hottest takes in sports right here with Jack on Sports, as always. So, no, it's, I think there's space for both for a while here.
For a while. I'm not going to dispute that.
But they have to adapt.
Yeah.
I guess.
So I'm not going to knock. I'm not going to
knock on wood, and with my fingers crossed, hopefully they will.
Yeah.
All right. They've adapted before.
Sure.
At the end of the day, NASCAR is kind of what brought, and I hate to say it, but brought the sport really to a whole different level.
Illegitimate.
There was Indianapolis, right? There was, but that was really it.
Do you want to know how close Stafford Speedway came to being part of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and the sanction?
What do you mean?
The United States Auto Club.
Okay.
Your grandfather was a life member of USAC.
Yes, there's a plaque in the office.
Yeah. And we were having trouble getting the Pinto legalized for modified competition. Your grandpa and I got on an airplane and went to Speedway, Indiana, and met with the folks at USAC. And they were all for it. And we left that office with an agreement that there would be a USAC modified division.
Wow.
And it would race at Stafford. And we felt that we could get possibly Islip and Albany, Saratoga. The following weekend, the president, the PR director, and the competition director all died in an airplane crash.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
And then, wow.
But
history could be very different.
But it didn't go unnoticed by Daytona Beach.
Yeah.
And your grandpa and Bill France Jr. had a great relationship.
Yeah.
And Billy called him up and said, WTF are you doing? Okay? And they hammered it out, and it was a give and take, and the Pinto was legalized.
So was USAC sanctioning really any events up in the region at the time?
Well, we ran, before we owned it, we had a USAC sprint car race here.
Okay.
USAC, because they were traveling. They didn't really have, and that's what we sold them on is now what you're missing is, you've got all these racetracks from Anderson to what is it called now? O'Reilly Raceway Park.
That's IRP.
It's now back to IRP.
Well,
okay.
It's O'Reilly Raceway
But
Park,
anyways,
but it'll always be IRP.
Whether it was Silver Crown, whether it was the Indianapolis 5, they were all one-off or two-off events at tracks. What we were offering was, by the way, a weekly franchise fee.
Yeah, sanction
fee, yeah.
That's a story I've never gotten before. That's interesting. But then the Pinto got approved and kind of really changed the whole sport of modifieds in New England. Kind of bring me through that time when there was this explosion of the cars were changing, the drivers were kind of becoming a little bit. I don't want to say polished, but no, it's becoming like a star. There was a lot like the names at that time we all really know. There's Evans and Bugsy, and then the Bodines come. Like, kind of talk me through about that time at Stafford.
All right. Well,
this is also right when you're kind of starting to go to MRN as well, right?
Not
yet. Okay.
Not yet. We planted the seeds. All right. It's hard to believe. It was me, Mike Joy, and a guy named Jimmy Power were the announcers. But we introduced a lot of things that before that kind of were never considered. And quite frankly, because most short track promoters were concerned about getting the beer stand open, open the gates, and
keeping
the
lights
race.
on.
And by the way, the racing, the action on the inside of the fence was spectacular. But what it was on the outside. Well, you must remember, at that time, I was messing around during spring breaks in Daytona, so I was exposed to the big time.
Okay. So
we come back.
You spent time down there.
Yeah.
Okay.
But without pay, just
you were
But
I
got
involved.
I got exposed to it.
So
I
knew
saw
what was going on.
I saw multiple announcers. I saw pit road reporters, and I said, "How can we do that stuff here?" Mm-hmm. Well, we had Steve Welch, and they were terrific people, and they provided us a lot of expertise long before this sort of stuff.
It's easy now, huh?
So we're stringing wire all the way. Now imagine speaker wire all the way around a half-mile racetrack.
The wire's still there.
Exactly. And we had these little boxes.
They're everywhere.
Right.
They're everywhere.
And what we would do is we had a guy that gave us a small motorcycle, and when there was a crash, whoever it was, Mike Joy or myself, I seldom got out of the booth because I was a ham. Okay.
It was?
Yeah.
Wow. I told you.
Man. Okay, it's been fun. But anyways, we'd go to the scene of the accident. Well, we made a big deal about it. All right? We were the first racetrack that had a team of announcers. Yep. That was unheard of.
Really?
Okay. Tom Gallen was the voice of Riverside Park forever. Okay, same thing. I think
it was a solo deal.
It was a solo deal most of the time. All right? But we got these multiple announcers, and so we have a crash. Now, we went an entire night touting that we're going to be able to take you to the scene of the accident. And wouldn't you know it, every damn heat race ran green to checker. All right? The support, the All-American Sportsman Series, green to checker. We get to the modified race. We're halfway through the race, and we have our first accident. And at the time, Bill Welch was in the infield. Now, first of all, Welchie was a senior citizen. Had to see him get on this motorcycle and try and drive over there. But it was over in turn 2. He gets there, and Mike and I are making a big deal. Oh, we're going to go down and see the accident. And you hear him plug in. And just as he plugs in, the microphone, the switch is on. And you hear, that dirty mother... Whoops. So there were some growing pains.
Awesome.
And that's just one part of it.
Yeah.
You know these pine trees over here in turn 3 and 4? Dad went down to Martinsville, and at that time, before the reconfiguration, in the corner in 1 and 2, there was beautiful dogwoods right up against the racetrack. Well, we were still in the construction business. Those pine trees were part of some interstate construction that were left over from, the median strip. I got an idea. They dumped them off here. Now, at that time,
see the pictures are
they
incredible.
were shorter. They were shorter than us.
Saplings, yeah.
So.
And now, because if you look back in the day, you can understand why a car could easily just go out of the park over
And they
there.
did.
Yeah.
We did.
We almost sent one out a couple weeks ago,
Well,
but
yesterday. And how about Mr. Excitement, Woody? Yeah.
No, I think that's that's interesting about how Stafford has really just become a place where we're able to take these to try stuff. It's I don't know what it is, but we're just able to take a chance on things. Stuff will, when you try something, right, it doesn't always go well, right? It doesn't always go smooth, but somehow it's just that it's in our genes to give it a shot,
Yes, it is in our DNA, but that having been said, people that are successful in any endeavor aren't afraid to take what I call a chance, have an idea. How can I nurture it? Look, that was, I think, instilled in the Arute family all the way back to my grandfather, Jack Arute Jr. He and his brothers, they lived in Fall River, Massachusetts, and the way they started the construction company is they all worked as laborers and then truck drivers, and they all lived in one tenement, and every dime that they earned, they put in the bank. They finally got to buy their first truck, and then they bought their second truck. Now, granted, this is in the early days, in the early 20s. But that was that sort of dedication to a concept. Well, your grandpa, he was an amazing individual because he wasn't afraid to think outside the box. He knew. He could see things. And the one that I remember is, now when we were winning all these races and we just took over, because of the IndyCar connection, there was Bruce McLaren had a specially built, purpose-built 427, I believe it was at the time, Chevrolet engine with an aluminum block, and that was significantly lighter. It was easy, with his reputation at Indy, he had one shipped to the Garutis.
Really?
It was the unfair advantage. I will be very honest with you. We were winning a lot of races. Well, when he took over the racetrack, he no longer was an individual competitor.
Yeah.
And he said, is this now that I'm on the shoe's on the other foot? And he outlawed immediately that aluminum block engine. The end result was, to his death, the Arute brothers never spoke to him ever again.
Really?
They retired. They retired from Stafford
because of that.
Because of that, because they couldn't grasp the concept that now your grandpa had a responsibility to 40 or 50 teams.
Yeah.
And I respect the fact that the Garutis had a responsibility to feed their kids.
Yeah.
That's it, pure and simple, and to win. And that happens a lot. It even happens a lot to this day.
Yeah.
Look at Ryan Preece, okay? Ryan, starts to run, and he goes down to the Cup, and he comes up here with a great car, and the headers are in the wrong position. Now, it's not a competitive edge, but he's being creative. Yeah. It looks sexy. But you have to enforce, and I'm saying the Speedway has to enforce the rules. So what happens? May not be the level of the Garutis. Priest loads up, MFs everybody around here. But what I found interesting is he came back, didn't he?
Yeah, the thing about, he's a great example of just, he's so competitive, and I think a lot of the guys, everyone in this paddock is ultra competitive. I don't care if you're driving a street stock or an SK. It doesn't matter. You want to win at Stafford. But, he's a great example of something so small, he thinks he's been done wrong. The story about the Garutis is fascinating.
Yeah.
Because it's the exact same thing today. It's hard to understand, the long game of this business. You want to be able to have cars on this track, 25 a week per division for as long as you can, right? But I think the one thing I will give our competitors some really great credit on is I think the people who are in the pits now have bought into this. They understand that we're doing these things intentionally. Like the whole thing about we're going to get rid of the Stafford late models. That went on for way too long.
Absolutely. Well, you know when it changed?
Until I got in
say,
the race car. Well, that was
when
intentional.
It changed, you showed them.
Yeah, that's intentional.
And assured them.
And I think
now, if you could pick up your game a little bit, it would
fair
be,
enough. Fair enough. It's hard.
I got to tell you a
harder
quick
than
story.
It looks.
When he started, he was cheap, so he didn't have a fire suit. So
I'll give him that. Yeah.
He's wearing one of mine.
I'm
It
Jack
says
Arute.
Jack Arute and all this. Well, he couldn't mount a football.
I mean, it was bad.
It was embarrassing. I went into the pits one night, and I was taking a piece of silver tape, and I go, you know what? You're so bad, I don't even want my name associated with it.
I see. Yeah, that's probably a smart move. I gave him that. But I will say our competitors now that they've really bought in between the pay-per-view deal.
Well, and you know why?
Social media.
But you know why the pay-per-view went over so well? Because you weren't greedy.
Oh yeah,
you shared.
But that was the whole thing.
And you do that, and this is look. You, I think, deserve an awful lot of credit.
We're just saying. I'm getting too much credit.
It's
all of us.
No,
yeah.
but because you're the point guy.
Sure.
All right. You deserve an awful lot of credit because what you did, and David deserves a lot of credit. First of all, you two now have an entirely different perspective because you're out there racing with these guys. You also, much the way I took with 3 announcers, and I'll never forget Ronnie Bouchard when he went cup racing. He came to me because I was at MRN, and he goes, I never could understand why you always stuck a damn microphone in my face. And he says, now that I'm here, thank you.
He was ready?
Well, you're doing the same thing. And I don't think it's a con job. You have instilled in these competitors, this is as much their house as it is the Arute's house.
Because it's true.
And their input and their suggestions, they're 90% of the time, are not made selfishly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I listened to some of these teams, and it would give away a slight competitive advantage they have, but they now look at the big picture.
Yeah, I would say more than any time that I've been around. I don't know if it's in the history of the track if that's ever really happened, but I think the buy-in to what we're trying to do with the on-track product, like the entertainment is second to none if you compare it to anything. It's better than a movie. It's better than a baseball game. It's better than even a football game, right? It's excellent. So I think a lot of our guys, especially the weekly guys, really get it.
Well, you got to understand. Do you know what that does? That elevates them back to the same thing we were talking about earlier, when the heroes that fans not only saw but touched, and not only touched but knew, were Richie Evans, were Bugsy Stevens, were Freddie DeSero, were Jeff Bodine, were Hop Harrington, Bobby Santos, Ron Bouchard. Yeah. The list is endless. You have the same thing now. Yeah. When now, like Tommy Fern, his shop is in where I live in Hamden, Mass. And I'll go into the local pizza place now and again and pick up a pizza, and Tommy's in there. And all of a sudden people go, hey, Tommy, how'd you do Friday night? Yeah. Hey, you can't help it. That makes you feel good.
Awesome.
That makes you, and that elevates your game.
Yeah.
And that was absent for quite a bit of time.
Yeah.
Here.
It took,
and in the industry.
This is what I think a lot of, there's always, new promoters in the business. There's people that buy tracks, they sell. There's rarely any consistency besides at Stafford. I hate to say it's too bad, but then people come up to us or they call us and ask, "How did you do this? How did you get the pay-per-view to be, pick up and go?
Right.
How did you get these guys to tweet, to interact with fans and be on the mic and be on the PA?" I mean, it takes a long time. It takes years to get it to a point where it kind of just works itself. It's not just like you flip a switch.
Yeah, without question.
It's you build this thing where, like Grandpa Jack always said, Stafford's the palace. They come to race the palace, right? Like you have to make it a palace for it to exist. Otherwise, if you don't come into Stafford and be like, man, this place is tough and I need to win here, If the driver's not coming in the gates thinking, man, if I get a win here, I'm the best. I mean, we're doing something wrong if that's not the case.
But what we have done historically here, too, which goes to that point. You win, you're the best. Now, instead of holding a victory lane out on the racetrack and a guy driving around with a checkered flag and remaining faceless, we elevate him.
Yeah.
Okay? We paint him bigger than life.
Because, they are. They're amazing drivers.
Indeed.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying is the quid pro quo is on the same level as the Cup Series, the Xfinity Series, and everything that goes on.
And what's so amazing now is how there's so much technology. Like, look, this isn't possible 3 years ago, 5 years ago.
Right.
The things you can do now are so powerful that the opportunities are absolutely endless. Endless.
Yeah, well,
endless.
I admire what you do and what you've done here with this. I don't know. I've been a pretty good uncle.
Oh, he's looking for a paycheck, probably.
No, not looking for a paycheck. Can you come up to the house and at least get my internet working?
Okay, I can do that. I could do that.
Before technology, before the internet, we've talked about MRN a few times here, and that's my full-time gig right now for the most part. And you've mentioned Mike Joy, and he actually just tweeted out a couple of weeks ago that he produced the program here for several seasons before he went south.
When I left.
And then that was going to be the question: is how did that? Who went south first? And obviously, you guys reconnected again at MRN.
Yeah, give us the story.
Listen, Mike always followed in my footsteps. Okay. You listen to Mike?
First to radio, then to television.
But here, as Joe Biden says, here's the deal.
Okay.
I love the cliches.
I mean, they're good.
Yeah. We're making the magic.
Yeah.
I made the mistake when Pete Hamilton won the Daytona 500. I was listening. MRN was, I think, 2 years old. Yep. And Ken Squire was the anchorman. Yep. Barney Hall was in turn one. And, this young blonde, and this is the final app, young blonde-headed man from outside of Boston, Massachusetts, who raced just 1 year ago at the Catamount Stadium, about to win the biggest race. I'm pissed.
Yeah, you should be.
I'm pissed. Catamount Stadium, they have an all-star race.
Yeah.
Every Friday night, or actually back then it was Friday night. Then we switched to Saturday. Pete Hamilton in the Worcester Sand and Gravel number 69 was here. Well, I knew Ken lived in Vermont, and I was at the University of Vermont. And lo and behold, back then they had, I know it's new to you, they had phone books. So I went to the phone book, and I found Ken Squire's name. Because we also, we didn't have push buttons. We had rotaries. I go, Mr. Squire, my name's Jack Arute, and I need to come see you. And this is an exact quote. Because you are in total error about Pete Hamilton. Really? He goes, well, why don't you come down tomorrow night? And he gave me directions, and he lived in a silo, which I thought was way cool.
Like a grain silo?
Yeah, but it was
like
built as a house, okay? Big red silo,
cool.
And everyone was a floor.
Very Vermont.
So I go up there, and I'm chewing Ken Squire's ass out, okay, and stating the case. And he chuckles and says, here, you want a doobie? Okay. Wow. So we proceeded to get wasted, right? Which was, look, it was the 60s.
It's Vermont, too.
Yeah, and it's Vermont, all right? And so he says, hey, would you be interested during spring break? We started MRN. You were listening to it. Come down and clear stations for us. And I didn't have anything else to do, so I drove down there, stayed in the Hotel Torino right outside the office, and for several years cleared stations. And then Tim Sullivan, who was it was Roger Baer, who was the founding executive producer, offered me a job. And it was tough because ever since a little kid, I had dreamed of being an announcer.
Really? Since the first time you did it?
No.
Before that?
As a youngster, listening to Sid Collins on the Indy 500. I had dreamed of being an announcer someday at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Wasn't quite Indy, but it was NASCAR. So when he offered me the job, the most difficult conversation I had to ever have with my father was tell him that I was leaving here and chasing my dream. Now, you got to remember, I was leaving him high and dry.
What did he say when you told him? Do you remember?
He said,
"Do what you got to do.
Do your very best." And one of the things that was great is I had been recently married and lived over in Ashford, and my daughter Jennifer was on the way, and they held kind of a stag, and raised a lot of money. Just the fans and the drivers and the owners, and you got to understand, we lived through a lot of really tough times, like when Ed Barton went up into the fence and just about wiped out Eddie LaRue and Frankie Scambato, and it was the very first time that I was here by myself. Your grandfather had taken two of my brothers to Pennsylvania to run quarter midgets, and when he left, he says, "Whatever you do, don't screw the goddamn place up." Okay? Now we got like 3/4 of the front straightaway without fence. Okay, we got Bob Johnson bitching because we went back to the last completed green flag lap, and he, Bouchard, he passed Bugsy on the backstretch, and I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, I just
What have I
destroyed
done?
my father's racetrack. The interesting part of that, Richie and Bugsy, because they didn't have a phone where they were staying, okay? And he said, "I'll call you at 1 o'clock." They waited with me. Waited until the phone.
Oh,
Because
your father
Dad's
was
going to
gonna
call and say how'd it go.
So you got
They-
Richie and Bugsy as backup.
I didn't ask for it.
That's
Okay, they came over and sat down. Phone rings. Bugsy picks it up. Says nobody got killed.
Well, so what happened that night? So somebody took the fence down?
Oh yeah, Ed Barton driving the 33 got tangled up and launched into the wheel fence. Well,
Coming out of 4.
coming out of 4. The wheel fence did its job. Didn't know wheel fence could keep and become a car fence, but that's exactly what it did. But it kept tearing up and got tangled up in the chain link, and it literally knocked Eddie LaRue off the stand.
Wow.
Now, the late Frank Scambato Sr., you got to remember, this was, Mr. White Suit, had the toupee. He was ready.
Yeah.
Right? We look up and we can't find Eddie. Okay? And everybody's young because now Barton's like by the flag stand, where's LaRue? Where's LaRue? And fine. Oh, hold on, this might be somebody important. No, it's a spam call.
Who's calling you?
But we found him about 5 minutes later. But it was sheer bedlam, and it was. So not only do we have that, but you got to remember, we got to put the place back together. And Dad's brother Chuck was a handful. The little scorer's booth that was built kind of the way your father puts me over here in turn 3.
Which scorer's booth? The race control now?
The race control.
Yeah.
That was built specifically for Chuck and his
Really?
friends because we didn't want them interacting with the community. Okay.
You wanted to keep Chuck separate.
Let's just say sometimes they were overserved.
Sure, okay.
And let's just say when all of a sudden we're rushing to try and, fix an accident, a real bad accident in turn 1, the phone would ring and, you know what? The pizza's cold.
Oh, no.
Okay? So, he did come to the races. And again,
Was he a race fan?
no.
So it was
But
kind of,
was,
he was
but
dragged into this?
to,
Or
it
was it an
wasn't-
option?
When we got it, you have to understand, he could be a BMOC. Instead of going to the country club, you take your buddies, and you've got a private booth, and you've got an open bar, and so it was, and there was always a little competition between, because this was Dad's. This was my father's dream, not Chuck's. Chuck went on to buy Lake Compounds.
Did he ever actually, did he buy it, though?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
And then
so he owned it
Hershey,
for a little bit,
and then, the Hershey folks bought it.
So when did, I have a couple of questions here. Actually, I'll start with this. So when you knock down the stands in 70, you do all the concessions, that must have been a massive undertaking. Like, how do you know if you've been to, he's been to all these tracks. You've been to all these tracks.
He knew what he wanted,
So
Paul.
what did, so I go in the stands now. I mean, those are stands that are designed to last until the end of time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, how did like the vision of that come together then?
Well, again, you got to remember all what he knew, and the basis of his knowledge was built around pretty damn good facility, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
Okay, so
he knew what he wanted. All right, he knew what he wanted, and he wanted a giant bleacher because before that, they were all low, and you know,
even here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he wanted it, and he wanted a press box because that's what they had at Martinsville, and that's what they had at the top facilities, and he wanted the very best in concessions.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, he wasn't as adept at it as your dad was. Okay, and back then, you know, Mark was just running around here. So he hired ARA, which really was a concession service that was in all the big-time sporting facilities. They came in and they helped design all of the concession areas. Very costly.
Yeah, and I imagine.
They took more than just off the top.
Yeah.
There really was there wasn't a lot of profit in the concessions at that time.
Yeah.
But it was the deal you made with the devil to get educated.
Sure.
And the one I'll never forget, which was to me to this day, I wish you would bring it back just in tribute to Jack Sr.
Uh-oh.
He was into Chinese food, okay? And he tells the ARA guy, you know, they're going through the menu.
He did always like Chinese food.
We're going to have sausage, and we're going to have this. Got to have egg rolls. Well, what are you going to do? Hire a Chinese guy to cook egg rolls? We had egg rolls at the Stafford Motor Speedway.
Wow.
I don't think Daytona had egg rolls. Okay.
That's funny. And then
Matt Buckler might approve.
Matt Buckler is a big fan of the food, yeah. And you also paved the Midway, I believe, right?
Yep, that's right.
If you look at how the place is laid out now, I mean, it hasn't changed probably.
The bones
since
are the same.
70s. And it's,
Yeah.
I mean, it's ahead of its time how the stands are elevated. I don't know if that occurred then as well, but there's not a bad, in the big stand, there's not really a bad seat in the house because the way it's built, you know, it's so high off the racetrack that not many other tracks are even like that.
We're very, very fortunate. The layout existed, but we, you know, and again, with his construction background, he knew, you know, he was able, and let's remember those plans from the Fox Farm in Berlin, Connecticut. He could play off of that. You talk about the Midway, though. One of the great stories, I'm announcing, and Bill Slater is still here, and we get a call that a woman has collapsed in the pits. Well, Bill says, I'll take care of it. So I find out, I look out, and the big gates open, and there is this blob on a beer trolley, okay? It's the woman, okay?
Yes, a beer trolley?
You know the big flat. All right. Bill has put her on the beer trolley and is pushing her up here to go to the ambulance. All right. And after the fact, we hear this woman is, God love her, she survived, no problem. And Bill leaned down, don't die on me now, lady. We only have 4 laps to go. Because he didn't want to call a caution and have the ambulance. Oh, so he figured, I can push her up there. That'll take care of 4 laps, and then we can get her in the ambulance and send her to Johnson Memorial.
Wow. That's a heck of a story. I mean, that's the first time I've heard that one.
I still want to get back to the MRN stuff.
Sure.
You go down to Daytona.
Right.
What's your first role? And 2, while you're down there, how close are you staying in touch with what's happening here while you're away?
Well, when I proceeded to go there full time.
Yeah.
All right. I stayed in touch for a while. Okay. There was a parting of the ways in the 80s, and it involved Ed Yarrington, and that was unfortunate. But I am a hothead. I'm opinionated, and I came here to a Spring Sizzler. And I had been in Daytona, but I also there were family problems with your grandmother, and I had come back to tend to that. And I was unemployed. I mean, I left MRN at the time because family called.
Yep.
And I came to the ticket office, and I said, I'm Jack Arute. I used to, my dad owns this place. And she goes, I don't know who you are. It was just, and I had no problem with that.
$15.
Right. And so, exactly. So she gets Ed on the radio and says, Ed, there's a Jackie Arute here, and he wants to get in for free. And Yarrington says, I can't deal with that right now. Have him pay the money, and I'll give it back to him later. I turned around, I got back in my car, and I drove away. And I told your grandfather, until you fire him, I will never go back to Stafford. And until he did, I did not. That's when your dad came in. And I welcomed the return because these are my roots. This is what defined me. I'm in the Hall of Fame not because of what I accomplished nationally. It's because of here. And this was my center.
Yeah.
Through all those years, and whether it was 35 years at ABC or my years at MRN, I could come home to here, and I was just Jackie.
Yeah. So, you talk about announcing with Mike Joy. We all got a treat maybe 5 or 6 seasons ago when
we brought the band back together. Yeah,
we're in the booth for the 5K, and that was awesome.
And we had Mike Massaro on the backstretch, if you remember.
That was really cool. Yeah. So, talk me through back in that time when you and Mike are calling the modifieds here, kind of like who were the personalities? Who were some of the best interviews you had there? And what was the racing like?
The racing was great.
Yeah.
Because then Jarzombek was coming up from Long Island. We had Maynard Troyer. We had, look, you go down through the list. Okay, and a great book, although I dispute a lot of he has a little bit of revisionist history, is this new book that Phil Smith has comprised about that era here, the men that live by the grace of God and 600 horsepower, because it reawakens, it reminds you of all the names, whether it's Leo Clary or, and a lot of what we did then, like we gave drivers nicknames.
Yeah.
Leo the Lion Clary, the Frito Bandito.
I love that one.
The Wassa Wassa Kid.
Yeah.
And part of it was we used to have fan month, where when intermissions were the norm, fans would make these giant banners. Well, this is what Mike and I were brought up under, and Mike's a very, very creative guy. He was at Riverside Park, and that's how we first interacted. And hey, why don't you come over and kind of what I did to you, come on over to Stafford. We can't pay you, but all right. And it clicked. And then when I went to Daytona full time, Mike jumped into the role as the PR director, because basically that was the way we always define it. If you were the PR director, you also were the announcer. And with all due respect to Scott Running, I don't think you'd want him announcing. Okay?
I don't think he'd want to do it either.
That's what I mean. I don't think he'd want to.
Maybe for one night, I'd like to.
I'm going to pass on that one.
But, so that was traditional. So now I leave Motor Racing Network to come back home. Mike replaces me at MRN.
I didn't know that,
Yeah.
And so, the MRN, so the MRN broadcast of the Sizzler one year was a Sizzler one year, right?
2 years.
Yeah, I sold that in. Yeah.
That
was a little bit of self-serving on my part.
I mean, it seems it. I don't blame you.
Well, it's kind of what I did with the Sirius XM NASCAR, putting you on the air on a Friday afternoon.
Hey, I probably got big numbers.
What do you think? Doubt it.
I mean, I go on Kevin Harvick's show. It's
been a big year for you.
Yeah, it has been. Okay. Talk to me when you're on NBC, okay?
Yeah, I'm probably not going there.
Ain't happening. Yeah. But, this whole thing is, MRN, I did that because we needed one more show. I forget, something had dropped out. Oh, I remember. It was, it surrounded the creation of the Performance Racing Network. We lost the events at Charlotte.
Yep.
No problem.
Sizzler.
I got 2. Bada bing. Yeah.
Yeah, because that broadcast that's how I picture the call of, we have it at the intro of our show.
Yeah.
We have part of it. It's just so iconic of, the names and the drivers. And I hope in 20 years or so, people will go back and hear Ben and Matt, on the PA and have the same thought.
Look,
I think they will.
Look, Paul, look at it this way. Take me out of the equation for a second because there's a little nepotism there, all right? Mike Joy, Mike Massaro, Dave Sutherland, all right? Paul Page, Ken Squire. You know, the list is endless. They have come to the Palace as announcers. We are known around the country as, you know what? If you're an announcer, you want to play the Palace. Now, that wasn't the way it was until we created that, till we defined the way we do it. Now, some of the ideas, and I've pitched them to you, and they've fallen flat, like, you know, when we were going to introduce the drivers for the first 5K and have them walk down the, well, it was a long walk. Okay?
It was a little flop.
Yeah. All right, so, you know, we tried it, we moved on. You know, the Bose sound system.
Yeah.
You know, it was unheard of. You know, usually when you went to a racetrack, you hear, up, and then, you know, the racing had stopped. The Musco lights. It's commonplace now on short tracks. It wasn't. The safer barrier in turn one, which I submit to you has probably saved at least a dozen lives that I can think of.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
That was a big deal. And so now we have to touch on it a little bit because it's kind of what you're known for is how did you end up at Indianapolis? You know, the first time you went there as an tell me about the first time as a fan, and then tell me about the first time as an actual announcer.
Okay.
On, you know, your Jack Arute is known for the Indy. You know, he's Indianapolis. So kind of talk me through it.
Well, 1969. Your grandfather had convinced me that you had to be 16 years of age to go to the Indianapolis 500.
To go to bits.
To go.
Fair. Okay.
So when I turned 18, he finally let me go with him. And I went and saw my first Indy 500, and I've not missed one since. 1969.
Who won that year?
Mario Andretti. And I will never forget. There's 2 points of 69. I remember leaving the stands and your grandfather saying, well, Jackie, you got to witness history. That guy's going to win a bunch of Indy 500s. But there were two other points. It was also the first time that Roger Penske fielded a car. And as I celebrated my 50th anniversary, so did Roger. And we have a kind of a going joke. I go, you know, Roger, you got a lot of Borg Warners, but I've been to Victory Lane at Indy more times than you have. Okay. Yep. And then I'm off to MRN. I've gone in separate directions. Mm-hmm. I've opened my own marketing and PR firm and did a lot of sponsor brokering at the Cup level. So I'd pretty much given up on my original dream of being part of the Indianapolis 500, but I always went. I always attended it. And Chris Economaki went to work for CBS. And it was a very lucrative deal for Chris. And ABC called the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and said, hey, we got to get somebody to do the pits. And just by happenstance, John Cooper, who had been part of Daytona, had left Daytona because he was a Hoosier guy and loved Indy and was the president of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And he says, you know, you need to get Jackie Arute. Who? I hadn't worked any television. I had done 4 or 5.
You hadn't done any television.
No, I had done 4 or 5 films, 16 millimeter films, voiceovers for those. And I'll never forget. I get a phone call, and and everybody knew that was my dream. I have my circle of friends, and his poor old secretary says, "Can you please hold for Rune Arledge?" And I go, "Okay, who's messing with me?" All right. Yeah, right.
For the fans, you got to explain who that is.
So at the time, Rune Arledge was the head of ABC. He conceived of Monday Night Football. He conceived of the way we covered the Olympics for so many years. He was
so you think you're getting a fast one pulled on?
I think I'm getting a fast one. Phone rings again. Mr. Arute, please don't hang up on me. Mr. Arledge needs to speak to you. Now I'm yes, sir. Yes, sir. He said, we want you to come to New York City tomorrow. We've dispatched a messenger to your house with a ticket, round-trip ticket. We'll see you at 11 a.m. Click.
You're like, what the heck was that?
Wow. Get on the plane, go up there, and there's Rune Arledge, There's Bob Goodrich, who was the executive producer for Monday Night Football and for their motorsports coverage, specifically the Indy 500, and the late Larry Cam, who was a multi-time Emmy Award-winning director and had been doing Indy for years. And we sat down at the table, and I said, well, have you brought a reel? And I said, a what?
Good.
And they said, like a demo reel. I said, I'll be honest with you. I don't have a demo reel. And they go, and I believe it was Larry Cam. He says, well, let me ask you a question. If we told you to go interview A.J. Foyt, what would you do? Well, I knew A.J. from his NASCAR time.
Okay.
And we had a relationship. And I said, well, I'd go interview him. Then all of a sudden it dawned on me. A.J. and Jackie Stewart had locked horns, and A.J. was boycotting ABC. Okay.
So he wouldn't do an interview.
Wouldn't do any interviews, and Economaki had attempted to mend the fences, but now Chris is gone, and, like a dumbass, I go, well, I'd interview him. So I leave, and I figure, I've blown this interview. I get a phone call the next day and said, look, we've got a sprint car race at Rossburg, Ohio, USAC sprint car race this Saturday. We're sending you a ticket, and we want you to be part. We're going to try you out for Wide World of Sports. They sent me the ticket, and in the box was, you remember those classic yellow blazers that they wore on Wide World? And if you don't, YouTube it. And it had the big embroidered. There was one for me.
Wow.
And went to Rossburg, Ohio, and it was myself in the pits. It was Al Michaels in the booth.
Wow.
And I think it was Sam Posey. My God, up there. Now I'm trying to think, how am I going to make an impact here? Now, I knew all the guys, because I followed it all.
Yeah.
So there's Tom Bigelow and Larry Rice. And, I'm telling him, I said, Jack, we got an idea. No one's ever done it. Why don't you get up on the outside of the racetrack for your open? And, give us a signal, and we'll come by and kick up the dirt on you. I'm dumb enough that I go, okay, sounds like a winner for me. So they throw down to me, and I said, Al, one of the keys is getting up on the cushion, and I'm standing on the cushion 32 degrees higher than, and for these cars with those 18-inch dirt tires, and here it goes. Boom. It kicks up the dust. They thought it was spectacular. First of all, they think, wow, we got a guy that's dumb. All right? We can send him anywhere. All right? But when I came back down, it was a real New York, Tony, and I can't remember Tony's name, but he was a D's, Dem, and Doe's guy. He was the cameraman. He goes, man, you are really effed up. Okay? Well, now we get done with that, and they said, okay, well, why don't you come to first week of qualifying? Now, remember, it was a month.
Yeah.
And they said, okay, why don't you come to the second week of qualifying? Wow. They haven't offered anything. Now, I'm still running my what I call racing real estate business. And that was the way it was the entire year. Got my first shot at the Indy 500. And what was difficult was the producer would say, go, Jackie. And I and Jackie Stewart start talking.
Oh, that's right, because he was...
So that's when I transitioned, to be quite frank with you, from Jackie, because if you listen to the old MRN broadcasts, Barney will throw to Jackie Arute.
Yeah.
By necessity, I moved to Jack.
Gotcha.
Which created another whole problem with your grandfather. All right. As I began to climb up the ladder in recognition, I set him up. Remember, he had a motorhome. You as kids used to ride in it all the time. It was that GMC thing. It was like, it looked like the Wienermobile, okay, without the hot dog in it. He's going to come after Stafford. He's going to go down to the Cup race at Pocono. Got him all set up. So just go to this gate. They'll let you in and you can get set up. I know it's going to be around 2 o'clock. Well, I thought I had covered all his bases. He goes down there and some guard goes, I know Jack Arute. And you aren't Jack Arute. So get the hell out of here. He is so pissed. He knows where I'm saying. He wakes me up. I got to drive out to the racetrack. Hey, Jack, how are you? You know, like, this is my dad. And he goes, oh. And he goes to the guy like this. Not only am I his dad, he's nothing but a cheap imitation. Okay.
Wow, that's amazing. So, do you remember who the first driver you spoke to at your first broadcast in Indianapolis?
The way I got on the air, and this was when I was still down there, is Ted McGinley was the PR director for Dover, Delaware. Mm-hmm. And he used to come in for Daytona and cover the pits. Mm-hmm. Well, his flight got delayed. He couldn't get there, and now they're in a panic. So what are we going to do? And Squire says, Arute over there, he does the PA. Why don't we send him down? Now all of a sudden, this is my break, right? So I get down there, and Squire sets it all up, and he goes, there's a caution. He goes, first round of pit stops are over. Let's go down and get an update from the newest member of the Motor Racing Network, Jackie Arute. Charlie Glotzback had pitted, and he was in Cotton Owens' car, and it was sponsored by Pylon windshield wipers. Ken, Charlie Glotzback is here in the pits. He's had a problem with the Pylon Wylon windshield. Hell, he's got a busted windshield. Back to you. The very fact that they continue to use me, all right, because the next year they send me down for Arca Victory Lane. And Earl Ross and Iggy Katona are in one of the best battles that I've ever seen. They send you down in a police car, from the tower. They hand me the microphone and the cord. I go down there, and when I leave, Earl Ross is leading the race. When I get there, the checkered flag had just fallen, so I don't even know. Right?
Who won, yeah.
So as they're pulling in, I go, ladies and gentlemen, here he is, the winner of the ARCA 300, Earl Ross. And he goes, you mean I didn't win it?
Who was it? Do you remember the
It was Iggy.
Oh.
And to the day Iggy passed, we used to have fun with them. You mean I didn't win it?
That is funny. So of all the races you called, which is a lot of them, is there like a one that stands out as like a top one?
Well,
or most memorable?
It had a profound effect upon me. And, as Ted Cruz, as he's selling his book, let me take a minute. I do have a book. It's called Tales of the Indy 500 by Jack Arute. It's available in bookstores, on Amazon. Not a top 10 bestseller.
Shameless plug.
Yeah, shameless plug. Because it involves some folks that I grew to know very intimately. It's a guy by the name of Jim Truman, who actually owned and conceived the Red Roof Inns. He was also the benefactor for a young guy with a mustache named Bobby Rahal. And they kind of came up through the support ranks together. And then they went, IndyCar racing. And they had a modicum of success. But they were two Ohio guys that kind of, they were very open and candid and welcoming to me. And we spent a lot of time, a month of May.
It's long, yeah.
It's real long. Well, lo and behold, Truman gets diagnosed with cancer. And everybody knew it. And the race, I didn't recognize him. Now, I'd been to Phoenix like 3 weeks before, and Jim was there. Gets to Indy, and it's like a skeleton. It's ravaging his body. And I think Bobby was in the front row or in the second row. But anyways, make a long story short, it's maybe the best shot Bobby has got to win his first Indy 500. Lo and behold, they postponed the race due to rain to Saturday. Pretty much all of us felt, what a tragedy, because, it was only a matter of days, what the doctors had said. Lo and behold, Truman survives to that Saturday. Near the end of the race, Kevin Cogan is leading the race, and Bobby is running second with a handful of laps. When at that moment, Sam Posey decided to try out the newest innovation that we had, and that's talking to drivers. And he's a little slow on the trigger, and he goes, Kevin, this is Sam Posey up in the booth. On this restart, what do you intend to do? They had dropped the green flag.
Oh, my.
Kogan goes, "I'm a little busy, Sam." Okay?
Wow.
And in one of those classic that now Indy's known for, smash the gas moves on a restart, Bobby takes the lead. Goes to victory lane. Jim Truman is there. And to this day, I can feel it on the back of my neck. He is so weak, he cannot stand up.
Yeah.
He stands up with his hand, and it wasn't just like, buddy, trying to support himself. And Bobby got out of the car, and before he even did the interview, he goes, "This one's for you, Jim." And we did the interview, and it was great, and it was touching, and it was moving. And at the end of it all, Truman says to me, "Thank you. I can go now."
Jeez.
Wow.
And just a handful of days later, he was dead.
Wow.
You can't be involved that intimately at something on that level and not have it impact the rest of your life.
Absolutely.
Wow. So on that same note, is there a race that was the most challenging or toughest or I won't say emotional because that one sounds like it was the most emotional.
I don't think I was bright enough to see anything as being really challenging. Eddie Flemke was a tough interview. And Eddie,
why is that?
Well, Eddie believed in me. All right, there were two drivers that I shared, Billy Greco and Eddie Flemke, and Greco, because we've lost Eddie, still to this day tells the story of me being down in the Garute's garage pretending I was an announcer, and Greco coming up to me and says, "You better pick something else, kid." Okay.
Wow.
But Eddie was the other way. All right, Eddie was an observer of humanity, and when I started announcing here, if I asked a question that could be answered yes or no, that's what I got.
Yep.
And it got very frustrating for me and others. Now, others had just quit on him, right? But he's over the house all the time. He's kind of like an adopted part of our family, although we used to laugh and say, if Dad would say the sky was blue, Flemke would say, "No, it's black." They very seldom, except on the SKs, that they agree. So I finally got so frustrated after so often, and I asked him, I said, "Why are you messing with me?" He says, "If you want to make it, you have to ask questions that I have to think about and answer." Never thought about it that way. And then as I moved up the ladder, Eddie was one of the first ones, because you know what people forget? Eddie used to go to Daytona, and you could always find Eddie Flemke down between turns 3 and 4, sitting in his car, watching the cars. And when practice was over, he'd go in and he'd grab somebody, that he was acquainted with and tell them what he saw. Now, this is before radios. This is before spotters and all that. So that's why I say he was an observer. And, Eddie made me work and made me hone my craft. And I tell everybody that Flemke and Richard Petty are the people that defined my career.
Really?
Yeah.
Why Petty?
My first interview with a driver, I get told, "Hey, tomorrow Richard's coming in the office. We want you to do a 5-minute interview with him." This is the king. Okay? This is Mr. STP.
Yeah, he's the real deal.
I got a yellow legal pad when I get there, and I must have 20 questions. And this is the way the interview went. I'm here. Now, he's sitting there. I'm here with Richard Petty. And I ask him the first question. Dead silence. All right. Maybe you didn't like it. Ask him the second question. Dead silence again. Now, it wasn't on TV, so thank God it was just cassette recorder. He goes, "Jackie, obviously, you got that pad with all those questions. You've had a lot of time to think about them. Now, if you want to give me the same amount of time to think about my answers, I'll be back tomorrow." He says, "Or you can put that paper down and we can just talk." And you've seen me work. I work without a net. I have never written a question down.
Really?
I have never said, "Do I think about it going in?" Yeah. All right. But it's just I absorbed. And one of the things, my wife insists that I suck at listening, and I do at home. But I perfected the art of listening, and I'll take you back and go on YouTube. when Al Jr. won the Indianapolis 500 for the first time in Victory Lane. I said, Al, I sense there's some tears in your heart. And he broke out crying. He says, Jack, you don't know what Indy means. You know, they're just as God has blessed me with that skill set, at least in work. Okay, probably not at home, but go ahead.
We are an hour and 40 minutes.
Oh,
into
wow.
this already.
My
That's
God.
fun.
Time flies when you're having fun, but I want to end in talking about the SK Modifieds, the bread and butter here at the Stafford Motor Speedway. Every Friday night for a number of years, 1982, I believe, is when they debuted here, and you were partially behind the SK Modified contest.
Here, contrary to what people think.
And that's what I want
Contrary to what
clear up.
people think, here's how the SK Modified division came together. Again, at the kitchen table. By that time, we were seeing a decline in tour type, whatever they were called,
They're
unrestricted modifieds. And my dad always had a philosophy: if you have the prettiest hardware store in the world and you don't have shelf product, you're going to go out of business. So he started looking at it, and he says, you know what, I don't want to give up the modifieds. And we kicked it around for a few days, and he says, let's call Flemke. And he brought Eddie over. And pretty much they started to hammer out, well, you can control the costs, in the shocks. You can control the costs and create a situation where when a guy wants to move, to the tour, it isn't going to cost him an arm and a leg, may cost him for a motor, etc. They hammered out, conceptually what they wanted, and it was considerably less money than what was being. And they dispatched Dan Pardee. They asked Dan, go out and kind of quietly float the trial balloon with a lot of the car owners. With all due respect, and Dan did a lot of terrific stuff here, it always sat sideways with me that people thought, A, that Dan Pardee conceived of it, when I truly believe Jack Arute and Eddie Flemke deserve all the credit. And I got into a real tiff with some Danbury folks over this.
On Facebook, I saw that.
You can think what you want to think, but those are the facts. We did look at, Dan examined the Danbury formula for their sportsman division, but that had nothing to do with the concept. All right, that's like saying that the person that invented the cassette recorder for video, the VHS recorder, stole it from Beta. Okay, just happened to be two divergent groups coming to the same conclusion.
And so that was the best way to describe it was in the earliest form of spec.
Absolutely.
Spec racing.
Yeah. Spec racing back then, nobody wanted to deal with that because that was the formative time. I mean, look, don't forget, we've got the transition from those coupes to some of the stuff that we saw, like Evans and Jarzombek and Greg Sachs. I mean, those were rocket ships.
Yeah.
Now, they were dangerous rocket ships because, again, we didn't know the things that we know now. But that was the beauty of modified racing as opposed to late model sportsman, which was heavily controlled by the rules, or by the Cup Series. They were called unlimited for a reason. I remember, I forget who it was, showed up in an all-star race with a rear engine modified.
Wow.
Okay. I've seen four-wheel drive modifieds, because everything was open on the board.
Everything was on the table.
Yep. Yeah.
Why? And the other big question I always hear: why SK?
They tried to come up with all kinds of names, and nobody could agree. And one night, Evelyn just said, "Well, how about SK?" Now, Evelyn knew about as much about racing as, I know about playing the piano. Okay. And all of a sudden, everybody says, you know what? That's a safe way to go. Okay. We don't have to explain it. Yeah. SK it is. And part of it was out of frustration because, we'd labored with it for like a month.
Yeah.
Okay. And all of a sudden, once we said it and everybody kept asking the question, it became as important as trying to figure out the 11 secret herbs and spices in Kentucky Fried Chicken. So the key was, in the beginning, we just smiled. We just elected not to answer it. And it's funny because it created an aura, and it didn't get wasted like state designations, which, oh, by the way, now that we got computerized scoring, I love it. When you got the 3 Rhode Island and you've got the 3 CT, it just, I think that's terrific. So that was it. The SK means nothing.
It's so crazy how that it's so natural now.
Yeah.
Well, time is everything.
But it fit, Paul. It fit from the time
away.
They said it. Yeah, there was
it
no.
Just works.
It was like no buy-in.
Yeah. So we'll end on one final question. We kind of asked this in all the interview. All our podcasts of the guest. What do you make of today's sport compared to the sport when you became involved and over the years, and where do you think it's going? Where do you think the SKs are down the road? Where do you think the short track, of the country are down the road?
Well, where they came from, and what do I think about the change and the transition? I've learned, and I remember when I was young, and I would hear old timers say, it isn't as good as it was. I still hear it when I'm on Sirius XM NASCAR radio, and I don't like stage racing, and it's convenient, but we forget guys would win by 3 laps.
Yeah.
So I have learned that whether you like it or not, you have to embrace change. There's some things that all of a sudden they've grown on me, and I think they're great. The transition of the race car, I think spec racing has become the key to sustainability. I also think that where it's headed, whether it's on a national level, where we now have been treated to some pretty good racing at the cup level when they arrive and drive. All right. Now, I know Kyle Busch would beg to differ because he always utilized that practice session, but also what we were able to forge here. One thing, Paul, that everybody has forgotten, fans, drivers, and car owners know, in the midst of a pandemic, when the Indianapolis 500 paid a reduced purse, every member that competed at Stafford got the same amount of money that they got in 2019 and then some.
Yeah. Nobody
hid behind the pandemic. And I can't think of another racetrack that can lay claim to that.
I'll give Roger Penske a little slack. The Indy 500 is a little more pricey
you
than
think?
A weekly.
Yeah.
A weekly.
No, and look, everybody understood
indicate,
but I use it only as an example that tends to slip through the cracks.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Now, I'll take it one step further. What does it portend for the future? I think it's all very positive. I think it has forced people like you and others that have seen things like the Stafford TV. Those are things that are going to be embraced and incorporated after we get rid of this crap from China. And that's a good move forward. Is that any different than 3 announcers? Is it any different than Musco lighting? No, it's moving forward. Yeah. I think you'll enhance your social media. One of the things I was never successful at doing here is I came up with the crazy concept of TV. Okay? And I was never able to assemble outside of initially when Tim DeRoyne and some of the guys that did it on a regular basis. But getting and attracting creative people that shared the same level of creativity as I did. You have done that.
We have a great team here.
You've got a team, and that team has really under the gun, because you walked in one day and says, "Oh, by the way, now we're gonna charge for this," and they deserve a lot of credit.
Oh, for sure. All our staff. Yeah. That goes from the TV stuff to the
concessionaires to Tom Fox to it's across the board.
And I think it's part of the mystique of this place, I think, is that people buy in, even the employees. They They love this place.
It's called pride, Paul.
Yeah, no, for sure.
It's called pride. And you know what? That pride is reciprocated. When they sign off, when Ben and,
they nail it
on behalf of Team Stafford, it's meaningful. Now, when your father introduced that term, I thought it was kind of hokey. Okay?
I mean, it is a little hokey, but
it
it's okay.
isn't.
Yeah.
It isn't, because what you've done is you have defined it, you have refined it, and you honor it.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay?
Well, and on that note, very positive. We appreciate you coming on the show. We could talk for another 2 hours.
So when do I
here.
get the paycheck?
It's the pay window. That's
way out there? Yeah,
right
over there.
Right over here next to the beer window.
No, it's a lot of fun, and you're doing a great job, and you as well, and you're just another one that I think makes Stafford proud, because not only do you have a national, prominence, but you've come back and you've helped him.
Yeah,
and
really appreciate
I
all
talk
the help.
about that centering. I think it's made you better.
Absolutely.
And I'm gone. Absolutely. And I'm gone, so now you can actually come here and enjoy it. Yeah.
No, we definitely appreciate all the stories, and hopefully we'll have you on again sometime and tell some more of the stories. We didn't even touch on half of your career, so it was fun.
Anytime, and I'm glad I can be the opening act for Carl Bergman,
the Bugman,
a.k.a. Bugsy
You're the warm-up
Stevens.
show.
Real quick, though, one time Dad, before we bought the racetrack, had decided he wanted to hire Bugsy Stevens and was willing to pay some pretty good money, okay? So he gets the number and calls, and Doris, Bugsy's wife. Now, he's not Bugsy, and her name is Doris, and your grandfather goes, "Hi, this is Jack Arute. Is this Mrs. Bugsy?" Didn't go anywhere.
It didn't go anywhere. Well, that was awesome. We enjoyed that, and kick off the new season of the Bottom Shot podcast with a great episode.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.